All right, Africa will, for the next 1 year, enjoy a long-standing free trade agreement with the United States of America. This development follows U.S. President Donald Trump's extension of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, that will see eligible African countries benefit. President Trump's decision to sign a fresh extension puts to rest fears of permanently cutting off the preferential trade deal for Africa after the existing agreement expired last September. AGOA, first enacted in 2000 to provide duty-free access to the U.S. market, covers more than 1,800 products, with the U.S. Congress planning to modify the program to provide more market access for U.S. businesses, farmers, and ranchers, and to align with Trump's America First trade policy. Now, CEO, Lit Network, Chukwuma Kenwa, joins me now. He joins me virtually. Good to have you join us, Mr. Kenwa.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So a lot of people were expecting that AGOA will probably get another 25 years because for the first time, we had that agreement being signed for 25 years, but we've seen a 1-year extension. Is this much of a relief for African countries?
Well, I think this 1-year extension after a 25-year window is a moment of reflection for the U.S. and should also be for African leaders, to go back and reflect on the program so far. And if the U.S. wants to move from trade opportunity to now more market access for the United States, which means it's not going to be all of free trade access anymore, without the U.S. really getting anything back, maybe giving trade access to over 1,800 products. So if the U.S. should build based on the principle of reciprocity, what is the leverage that African countries have got to be able to sustain that, considering that some of the trade barriers that exist between some African countries and the U.S. was actually to protect local producers. So now when you have a big giant both in agriculture and all of some areas that Nigeria is trying to find market in the US, if they also have all of the free access, then what is the protection for local manufacturers and producers? So it is something also as the US has given that 1 year to reflect, it should also be a time to reflect and re-strategize for African leaders.
I like that you said it is a 1 year to reflect, whether for Africa or for the U.S., because we both know that Trump is very big on national interest over, the interest of other countries. It has to be America first. Do you see any long-term, stable long-term solution in the works? Do you think that this will be extended further when the 1 year eventually ends?
It all depends on, the country that is involved. Because, the U.S. government has made it very, very clear. It's no longer be like freebies like it was in time past. I think the U.S. have done their bit by, something that was originally meant to be 8 years, extended to 15 to 25, and now 1 year extension to review. And for African countries to actually ask themselves, if we want to do business with the U.S., then we'll have to be big on collaboration. We have to be big on reciprocity. It should be like equal access. It's no longer like a case of, just give you access just for free. When it comes to negotiating big, we know that Trump is big on that. But I think African countries could actually have an advantage if they can come together as one market, because you are talking about, a collaboration with a giant, a heavyweight. And if African countries decide to go individually, right, it's going to be a problem. So whatever strategy that African countries want to consider now, it should be integrated. And with that, they can be able to negotiate, and the U.S. is going to respect such negotiation. But if different nations, some would say, well, we want to go this way, we want to go this way, we want to lower tariff, we want to reduce some of those barriers. And when you have someone that's saying, no, removal of the barriers is going to impede on local production. If Africa does not speak with one voice, then of course it certainly have no advantage over a nation whose GDP is over 6 times bigger than the entire African 54 nations. So you can't get into the ring with the U.S. just going as lone voices.
And I get what you just said, Mr. Kenwa, because trading as a bloc would be more beneficial for us as a continent. But I'm not sure if President Trump wants to continue to trade with Africa as a bloc. He comes across as a person who wants to go to a nation and takes what he needs, rather than having a block of countries where he might not necessarily need anything from about 5 or 10 of those countries. I want to get your thought on that, along with the fact that it has the power to remove nations from the AGOA, from the Act. South Africa is included in this particular one. Both countries have strained diplomatic relations. If he does decide to renew, do you think that he will keep South Africa in for long?
For now, the likelihood of South Africa coming on board, it's not there, right? I don't see that happening. And of course, for Trump, we're dealing with individual African countries. We certainly foster more of the U.S. interest. But then African leaders should be able to protect and project Africa's interest. It is not for the U.S. to put it up forth there. I mean, when you want to deal with the EU have sustainably shown internal unity that, going against one means like almost going like, oh, you can't do that with the EU because they come to you as like one block, as one unit. And that's how Africa should be able to deal with its global affairs, especially when it comes to heavyweights like the United States of America and China.
Does this also give an opportunity for Africa to expand its market? We've seen Nigeria's president sign bilateral ties with the UAE. There's been the agreements with Turkey. I mean, he was in Turkey recently with Brazil. Kenya also recently finalized a trade deal with China. Should we now begin to look and expand beyond the US and AGOA?
Certainly, but of course the US have obvious advantages because, for instance, many nations, even like for some of the ones within the BRICS, would even prefer to have their foreign reserve in a more stable currency. And so when you have our farmers, especially, one advantage I expect Africans and especially Nigeria to leverage on the AGOA would be on, non-oil sectors. I mean, largely over 90% of the gains we've had in AGOA Act, has to focus on oil. I mean, diversifying more whether it's the cashew nut, the sesame seeds, right? All of the things we're trying to do in terms of non-oil oil export sector. So if we can begin to leverage more on that, build more on that, then that is going to give us obvious advantages, that maybe just focusing on areas where, we do not have all of that advantage, especially the fact that you are exporting crude oil. Certainly that will not be an advantage because you're losing a great deal of the wealth. If it's something, maybe a kind of an act that fosters more pushing out the refined version of the oil, then of course that is going to do far better for the nation's economy.
And President Trump also seems to be more interested in rare earths mineral that could boost the tech market or the tech industry in the US and certain industries, cars and those kind of minerals that can make chips and all of that. He's not necessarily interested in getting food crops, to the US. They are looking to ensure that America produces for itself and is sufficient for America. I mean, you saw the statement from the Congress who are reviewing the AGOA Act to ensure that ranchers and other producers in the US do not begin to suffer. Let's talk about the AFCFTA. Is it time for Africa to begin to ensure that, look, under the AFCFTA, we've started trading, but not so much in large volumes. How do we ensure that right now we're doing business and with one another? It's not just on paper, but really in volume.
In all honesty, I want to join the voice of advocacy like Dangote, who severally has cited how it's easy it is for an African, right, an influential businessman to have his way in and around Europe to have access, much more than within African countries where you even have restrictions up to the aspect of entry. You still have to apply for visas, for even when it has to do with African countries. And then removing some of those barriers as it has to do with entry. First reviewing some of the trade barriers, some of the challenges we have, whether it's in terms of, not being transparent, because sometimes you could have on paper saying, oh, we have a trade agreement, but then the customs could make things a lot difficult. It's more or less okay, this is the formality, but when it comes to the real deal, this is what is obtainable. And at the end of the day, just for instance, when you talk about ECOWAS, you want to travel within ECOWAS, And maybe like at every point, you still need to stamp your passport. You still need to pay like 1 or 2 tokens. That is not the way it works in Europe, because in Europe, it is when you pass from one nation to another until you are told that you are no more in Germany. You are now in Austria. Perhaps you wouldn't know, because there won't be anything like border control. But can Africa actually afford like access without border controls of even of some informal parts on the roads, maybe leading to Nigeria to Ghana? So some of those bottlenecks, hurdles, need to be reviewed, right, and addressed. It's not just like to make it beautiful on paper, but of course look at those barriers and address it.
And isn't it also slightly absurd to say that we're looking for a free or zero tariff agreement with the US, but amongst ourselves on the continent, our tariff is still quite high. Though with some countries, it's a single-digit tariff, but at least at some point we should be doing zero tariff as well.
That's right. That's right. And I mean, what the US is saying, I mean, when we review that, it's fair enough. Because if you are saying to the US, you know what, we're going to impose high tariff so that our farmers, our local producers is not going to suffer. You know what, we are going to place a ban on certain products, and the US is demanding equal access. That word reciprocity, which is one of the core principles of diplomatic relations, then I think it's fair enough. What Africans now need to do is to get back to the drawing table. Because if we don't do that, at the end of the day, many African countries will naturally be disadvantaged to continue even their AGOA, even if they have like a kind of a free offer based on the review template. They wouldn't even be able to take the opportunity. And I can tell you, looking at the billions of dollars that nations in Africa has churned out annually for the past 25 years, we can actually say that indeed it's African growth opportunities and, acts, right? I mean, so it's one that has opportunities act. It's one that has fostered goodwill for Africa, and must, in some ways, African countries must find a way to, continue their collaboration.
Thank you so much for your time. Chukwuma Kenwa, CEO Lead Network. We'll continue to follow up that extension of the AGOA and see how African countries benefit and countries that are not included as well. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to have you on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, you're watching What Now? We'll take a break and return with another story still in Africa. Stay with us.